Thank you so much, Arlene. It is great to be here with so many friends. Many of you all in this room know the Austin restaurant El Arroyo, which each day has a clever, witty saying out front. I don't know how many of y'all saw the day after Obamacare passed what El Arroyo put out front. It was a simple legend. Come inside, enjoy the Obama special. Order anything you like, the next table pays. We are in an extraordinary time right now. I am honored to be joining all of you. I am very honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside Justice Scott Brister, who is a distinguished jurist, a scholar, and a man of profound principle, who will be a very able leader of the new 10th Amendment Center for TPPF. I know both of us are honored and privileged to be part of TPPF, which has for so long stood for principles of limited government and fidelity to our Constitution and respect for rule of law, and ultimately for defending freedom. You know, we're seeing in Washington an incredible expansion of federal government power, unprecedented in any of our lifetimes. And as a result, we're also seeing a renaissance all across the country as there are Tea Parties springing up, and Americans in every state are going back and picking up the Constitution. They're going back and rereading the Constitution and discovering the principles upon which this nation was founded. And in particular, more and more Americans are rediscovering the 10th Amendment. I've been asked today to give a very short ode to the 10th Amendment, which I will try to refrain from using iambic pentameter. But nonetheless, it is an ode from the heart. You know, it's easy to forget that when our Constitution was written, it was a revolutionary document. The men who assembled in Philadelphia to write that Constitution had just emerged from a bloody war against Britain, winning our independence. And the Constitution they drafted was unlike any legal document the world had ever seen. For millennia, the view had always been that power emanates from the top. It emanates from kings who were anointed by God, who govern the people, and any rights the people have are gifts by grace of the monarch. What the Founding Fathers did in Philadelphia is they inverted that understanding of government. Instead of power emanating from the top and being used to govern the people, the Founding Fathers began the proposition that the people possess the ultimate sovereignty. Hence, the Constitution begins, we the people. And they began with the notion that the entire purpose of the Constitution was to limit the power of government. That was a truly revolutionary concept. The 10th Amendment provides that the powers not given to the federal government by the Constitution are reserved to the states and to the people. James Madison in Federalist 51 explained the genius behind it. He said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But the great difficulty of designing a government of men to govern men is to enable the government to govern the governed, and yet at the same time oblige it to govern itself. That's what the Constitution and the 10th Amendment is all about. It is about the principles of limited government, of constraining the authority of the federal government. The framers understood that politicians, inherent in the DNA of politicians, is the desire to increase one's power. And the framers understood the best way to restrain that is to put chains limiting the ever-growing expansion of federal government authority, because with each step that government authority expands, the liberty of the citizens recedes. The 10th Amendment embodies the basic principle of federalism that we must limit the federal government to only those enumerated powers that are necessary for an effective nation. And I would suggest to you there are three distinct advantages of the principles of federalism as reflected in the 10th Amendment. Number one, a vibrant 10th Amendment limits the growth of government. The more power that is aggregated in Washington, the more it becomes a perpetual motion machine. The more it exists to grow and expand and grow the reach of its power. And yet if power remains at the state and local government, as the framers talked about in Federalist Number 10, you have different branches of government that will fight amongst themselves and resist each other, which will in turn serve and protect the liberty of the people. Secondly, however, keeping power at the state and local level enhances accountability. If you or I are unhappy with the decision of the city council or your school board, we can go and talk to the city council member or the member of the school board and make our views heard. And if they don't like what we have to say, we can run for city council. We can get involved directly at that level. If one of us wants to express our views to the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, that's a substantially harder proposition. The more power is drawn into Washington, the less accountable it is to each and every one of us. The less able each of us is to control the government. But the third advantage of federalism is it allows the 50 states to be what Justice Louis Brandeis referred to as laboratories of democracy. It lets each of the different states try different policies, see what works, see what doesn't. We wouldn't expect the laws in the state of Texas and California and Massachusetts and New York to be exactly the same, because the values and mores of the citizens of each of those states vary. And that's quite likely. That's as you would expect. Now, the virtue of that is it enables states like the state of Texas to reflect the values of the citizens of Texas, to reflect principles of limited government, to reflect principles that protect economic freedom, that encourage entrepreneurship, that have low taxes, that have low regulation, that expand opportunity. That's why we see millions of people coming to Texas every year, because of the opportunity that exists under those policies. And yet when the 10th Amendment is forgotten, when one policy comes from Washington, what it does is impose a one-size-fits-all rule across the country. It destroys the experimentation between the states. It destroys the competition between the states. And it destroys the ability of each state to reflect the values of their citizens. There's never been a time when principles of federalism and 10th Amendment have mattered more than right now, because there's never been a time when they've been more under assault. I want to close with two concrete examples of ways federalism can have real teeth in the modern world. One example that there's more and more discussion of, and I think is a very good thing, is a balanced budget amendment. Now, what's interesting is the federal Constitution provides two means of proposing an amendment to the Constitution. One is it can go through Congress. But going back to James Madison and expecting these men in Congress and women in Congress who are most definitely not angels to propose limiting their own power, I suspect we're going to have to wait an awfully long time for that. But the second method of proposing a constitutional amendment is the state legislatures. And if 2/3 of the state legislatures propose a constitutional amendment, then it goes to the states for ratification. And there's not a darn thing Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid can do about it. The Constitution gives us a concrete way right now to put teeth in federalism, to exercise the prerogatives of popular and local sovereignty, and to constrain the out-of-control spending of the federal government. A second way federalism can have real bite is the lawsuits that are being brought right now by Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott and some 20 other states, standing up and fighting against the federal government. As y'all know, I had the great honor of serving under General Abbott for 5.5 years, and I am convinced he is the finest Attorney General in all 50 states.